I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome back to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here, BPM. Again, I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. Come on in. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe. Do all those things that continue to help the platform grow. All right. So quickly, we expect Dhoruba to join us in about an hour. So I want to get through some of the things that I had lined up in advance of that. And then we'll look to check the comments for questions, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation, condemnation, contemplation, and more. But again, please, in the meanwhile, like, share, put this in your socials, let others know. As your doctor says, it's on again. So what I want to try to do in an hour here is, beginning with this idea of conspiracy theories, draw a quick parallel and thread that is that this fascinating podcast about the material basis for the rise of conspiracy theories in the United States, I thought was fantastic and fascinating, but it left, of course, some important pieces out, one of which is the specific impact on Black people, which is the sort of thread I want to draw here, that behind many of the overtly, nominally, even symbolically Black and even radically Black are very white conservative ideas and concepts whose origins are left largely either unknown or under-discussed or unfocused upon as and unquestioned. So that's sort of one of the themes here that I think is a thread throughout all of the and particularly with one of those dominant mythologies being Black capitalism. So I want to start with, and I put the link in the show description already, but I will just pull it up just to have a sort of graphic representation of what I'm talking about. One of the media outlets that I do travel around is this podcast called Chapo Trap House, which is Marxists, sort of white boy Marxists is what they sometimes have a woman co-hosting, but sort of like a white boy Marxist thing. And so that's what I'm talking about. And you can listen to the whole podcast. It's something you have to have a sort of an acquired taste for in terms of the presentation. It's just one white dude talking. And I happen to find this particular podcast fascinating, but I could understand stylistically if it were to become might not be somebody's cup of tea. But that said, there are a couple points that he raises that I think are really interesting. And as someone who is almost forced, I feel, through routine interaction with my students, again, even just yesterday, there are variations of what is discussed here that come up in all the time. And being, again, that the classroom is primarily at this point where I have the most engagement with Black working class youth, it's almost becoming clearer to me how, the transmission of at least some of these ideas. So the podcast starts with again, as I've summarized in my notes here, a white materialist history of the white supremacist logic behind black capitalism. That's sort of the phrase I put in my notes. And that I also agree broadly with Noam Chomsky that there's that, as he once said, people dismiss institutional analysis with the label of conspiracy theory to prevent that analysis. And then ultimately, for our purposes, to steer us away from science, revolutionary ideology, and other analyses. And as a sort of foreshadow of a story, I think I'll still have time to get to. This is where I've most felt. These are the moments where I most feel, and even at times appreciate, my mixedness. That is my ultimate political goals and focus, but my interest and appreciation even for a podcast like this. One of the first points that Christman, Matt Christman, the host of this, makes is that what we're often discouraged from recognizing is the involvement of intelligence agencies, or the relationship intelligence agencies and statecraft have as distinct narratives around conspiracy theories. So there are, as he ends up talking about, the very real conspiracies of COINTELPRO, MK Ultra, and one that I'm going to come back to I had actually never heard of that's fascinating. These get blurred or conflated with some of the mystical and less politically grounded versions. He also makes the very important point that conspiracy theories, as we know them today, at least, emerge largely after the Second World War, maybe a little earlier, but primarily after the Second World War, and are products of both an evolving mass media and communications environment and a new mass society based on industrialization that takes people out of the farmland, out of the more direct, as he puts it, relationship to their labor. That Marxist alienation increases, and when people who are initially in the early stages of the conquering of this country saw their labor more immediately related to their own material reality. That is, they saw the value, the end result. They were not alienated. They worked the crops, produced the crops produced yields. They got that, and then they could see it all happen. But as they got more and more removed from that through industrialization, mass society, and the mass media that helps arrange all of that, they needed to start to fill gaps with, well, who's causing that? So as opposed to a drought, maybe at some point inspired by God, causing crops, blah, 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 and all the domino effect from that, it becomes, well, I'm not really understanding or seeing the immediate pathway to my own poverty and oppression. I know I'm oppressed. I know I'm being done wrong, but it's becoming increasingly more difficult to identify the source of that hostility. So Christman points to the Freemasons as one of the earliest targets of, and he does a really good job, more than I'm going to say here. This is none of this is my expertise, but in talking about the origins of the Freemasons, the disappearance of some key figure in their early history that led to some of the mysticism around them and their power. But what he points out is that he's saying they're basically just a fraternity of the middle class or the bourgeoisie. They're like a more bourgeois version of a fraternity. He then talks about the change that occurs, particularly around World War I and the rise of the Russian Revolution, and then the Red Scare, and how because of this, the target of the enmity starts to shift from the Freemasons to communists, and then the Jews start to, and then he talks about the prevalence of the focus on Jews in the society, where he talks about people of the day like Henry Ford, who he says, that is, Matt Christman says, was the Steve Jobs of his day. And imagine if Steve Jobs was overtly anti-Jew, supporting Hitler, overtly calling for the extermination and eugenics and all kinds of, so that's, and shifting the focus away from certainly a capitalist ruling elite, a white supremacist cabal of sorts, taking all the focus away from them and putting it on, in this case, the easy target of Jews. And then to Christman's point, over time, we're encouraged through this process, all of us, to move away from that institutional analysis and the fact that the state is evolving its own counterintelligence program, MK Ultra specifically, and then this project that Christman points to called Midnight Climax. I had never heard of this one before. And Midnight Climax was part of the effort of the CIA to weaponize LSD, and they, in this case, took over a brothel and had the sex workers dose the men who were their clients to see how they act. And every time I hear about one of these things, I can't help, if anybody has ever experienced any form of hallucinogen, but particularly LSD, the idea that you would experience it could at times get bad enough or scary enough or wild enough, but the idea that you would experience it not having known that you were dosed with it, and at the time not even knowing what it was, that would be terrifying. But to Christman's point, we're discouraged from acknowledging statecraft and the purposes of it, as some around here might describe it, the settler colonial purposes of it. We're discouraged from a recognition of any of that. In Christman's point, in the I guess the general white world, they're just discouraged from recognizing the role of capital in any of this. And then he points out, that is Christman, to how in the 70s, because the full suppression of that point of a recognition of the state involvement in oppression, there were a series of movies that pop culture was still, there was that, I'll paraphrase, there was still this heartbeat within pop culture and of an attempt to point people back to what would be legitimate conspiracy. That is the idea that two or more people get together to do something technically illegal or officially illegal. That's all a conspiracy is. What Christman was saying was that had not yet been fully suppressed beneath all of the Masons, the Jews, the communists, and it survived enough that he mentions a couple of films that we got that I actually watched over the last 24, 36 hours. So he mentions the film Executive Action, which was actually written by Trumbo. What was his first name? What was Trumbo's first name? Who actually was acted in, had his life told in a film recently that I actually saw. Dalton Trumbo, and he was played by Bryan Cranston. A good movie. I think it's worthy of watching. And which was about Trumbo being whitelisted by Hollywood because of the Red Scare and his association allegedly with the Communist Party. But so it was interesting. And what executive action is, as Matt Christman describes in the podcast, is some of the biggest actors of the day in 1970, including starring Burt Lancaster, portraying the white WASP ruling elite that developed and then ultimately carried out the assassination of John F. Kennedy. To me, it's a great movie because it's not driven by action or violence. It's driven by story, narrative, script, acting, and of course, the plot being so interesting. I thought it was great, and I'm thinking that what we would get today, similar. And then I rewatched Parallax View, starring Warren Beatty, about political assassinations and how psychology is used to develop assassins. And then I also watched Winter Kills, which was an early film, 1979, with what's his name? Who and it's I just watched it too. What's his name? Jeff Bridges, who plays a young man who is uncovering the assassination of his half brother, who was at the time president of the United States, or on his way to being president of the United States. And it's basically, and they're all variations of how, whether it was Kennedy or any other assassination might have taken place. But the point that Christman is making, and I would agree, is that this was sort of the last chance, the last gasp that we got at seeing mainstream media depict with any seriousness any of these issues. Nowadays, what we get, and I don't think I'm getting this from Christman, but nowadays what we get, if they bring up any CIA conspiracy or anything like that, it's involving something likely with Arab or Russian so-called terrorists or something like that, and very little to do with what's actually happening here in the U.S. or has happened here historically vis-a-vis radical politics. So, but then Matt Christman, and this is the part that actually made me say that I would want to do an episode on this, is that Christman, because as fascinating as this all was up to this point, it's not until Christman mentions the book. Am I now going to, oh man, am I going to be able to access these now? Okay, I think so, yeah. The book that some of you may recognize as soon as I say, by William Cooper, Beyond the Pale Horse, Behold a Pale Horse. It's not until Christman mentioned that I said, okay, that's what I said, okay, now I'm really thinking, because if anyone has, and if certainly of my generation have ever spent any time in any black bookstore, this is definitely a book they would have seen being sold. They likely would have read, by Milton William Cooper, Behold a Pale Horse, and that would become a sort of early introduction into the world of conspiracy theory. And actually, I'm gonna go through it. I'll just go through it now. And I said, this is fascinating. I said, this is fascinating because every black bookstore I've ever been in has had a copy of this. I read it years ago, at least big chunks of it. I think it was a pretty big book. I don't know that I read. And I remember another one that I read almost, I think in its entirety. It was equally, if not longer, hundreds of pages, called The Unseen Hand. And ultimately, and Christman doesn't mention this, but The Unseen Hand was another variation of this. And ultimately, what first got me to be alerted to what I was reading was that after it sort of outlines what is the broader conspiracy, or that there is a broader conspiracy, it starts to target communism. And The Unseen Hand, I remember, argued that the goal of Marx, who was truly, as The Unseen Hand argued, an agent of the Jewish world ruling elite, was to, through communism, accumulate all the world's resources to be held and administered by them. That's how they were defining or redefining communism as that which accumulates all the resources and then holds it within a tiny state apparatus that is, in this case, of course, operated and managed by Jews. And that's when I started to say, okay, I don't think this is going in the direction. But Behold the Pale Horse was another version of that. Milton William Cooper, who was shot to death in a shootout with police in 2001, while largely unknown in the hated mainstream media, was the most important conspiracy writer and thinker of his time. Chances are individuals like Alex Jones, QAnon, and even Donald Trump would not have manifested the way they have without the influence of Bill Cooper and his book, Behold a Pale Horse, which 27 years after it was first published in 1991 remains the primer of the new American paranoid canon. So I think it's interesting to note that they start off in this article by talking about Christman's importance to the white right. Right, I just want to sort of emphasize that quickly, that this is a reference to the white right. All right. Because as I move ahead here, but if you want to know how Bill Cooper's book came to Harlem, the fastest way is still the A train to 125th Street. From there, walk east to between Frederick Douglass and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevards, which is where, if he's in the mood, you can find Bro Nova at his sidewalk table across from the world-famous Apollo Theater. So this is, again, through black bookstores, street corner vendors, and as we'll see, through music, a lot of what still to this day forms the basis of people's approach to the Illuminati and so on and so forth emanates from, this is just one, I think, example of now, in the past, my approach to Louis Mashaw and his bookstore was a little more favorable than I think he's done here, where it's more the black bookstore becomes sort of reduced to just a purveyor of this kind of conspiracy theory stuff. I don't even mean to suggest that when I say that I found this book in every one of them. I think these bookstores are extremely important, and not everything should be judged by these books being present there, but they are in fact there, which at times I think causes some confusion in terms of what is seen as what should or should not be taken at what levels of seriousness. Bro Nova and his fellow merchants carry on the tradition. On their tables are classics: Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, Toni Morrison, a hard-boiled Donald Goines. Beside these are dog-eared tomes like Yurugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior by Marimba Ani, and Are Caucasians Edomites by Dr. Malachi York, founder of the Nubian Nation, who is currently serving a 135-year sentence in the Fed's Florida, Colorado Supermax. It might seem a reach to find Behold a Pale Horse in this company, but Bro Nova and his friends have done a brisk business with Cooper's book for decades. The article even mentions my guy, Steve Coakley, who I admit I used to watch all the time. I used to go see his lectures all the time. Uh-oh, did I mess something up? I think I just messed up a schedule with Dylan Rodriguez. My bad, Dylan. I gotta, okay, come back to that. But yeah, I used to go see Steve Coakley all the time, and Coakley would I thought his lectures were fascinating, and he dealt in a lot in these discussions. And then there was, I admit, not a lot of room for critique. There was not a lot of room with Coakley or his audiences for discussion of what was being said. So I admit there were times where I had a couple questions, and whether with Coakley directly. I mean, I drove the man to and from Frostburg when I brought him to Frostburg at one point and tried to engage, and there's just not a lot of room for that. I would have to acknowledge that that was my experience. But then, as the article shows, that a lot of certainly my generation's rap music began to pick up on some of these themes. For many lyrical assassins, Bill Cooper's "Behold a Pale Horse" became a key text. Rappers who have mentioned Cooper in his book include the Wu-Tang Clan, Big Daddy Kane, Busta Rhymes, Tupac Shakur, Talib Kweli, Nas, Rakim, Poor Righteous Teachers, Gang Starr, Goody Mob, Suicide Boys, Boogie Monsters, Wise Intelligent, Public Enemy, Ms. Math, Aslan, Lord Allah, Raz Kaz, and the Lost Children of Babylon, who told their listeners to prepare to meet your fate like William Cooper when the stormtroopers breach your gate. William Cooper wrote that everyone kind of what everyone kind of knew. Prodigy of Mobb Deep said, for many, rest in peace. For many in the black community, it was common knowledge that the CIA was bringing dope into the ghetto to further enslave black people, to further enslave the people. What was the big surprise? What was the big surprise? That, as Cooper claimed, AIDS had been whipped up in a test tube at Fort Detrick, home to MK Ultra, as a plan to wipe out Africa. The fact that Cooper was a former naval intelligence officer, a big fat white guy who lived in Arizona, only made it all more believable. And sorry if I didn't read that clearly, but that's the article, the author's article, saying that part. Prodigy is only quoted as saying that Cooper wrote what everyone kind of knew. And then what the article is saying, and this is this is a concern I have, is that there are bases, what is more provable or demonstrable in terms of MK Ultra, Fort Detrick, down the street from me, unfortunately, all of that gets conflated with other claims. I read at one point Leonard Horowitz's book that argues that Fort Detrick developed AIDS as a chemical biological warfare weapon, and was very moved by the argument. Do I know that it withstands the full scrutiny of whatever? No, I don't. But I was caught up. I read that and thought it made sense. I thought it made sense, and it was connected to some very real efforts. So, but there it is. But then as we move forward, then we get the Illuminati wants my mind, soul, and my body. Prodigy rapped. Secret societies trying to keep their eye on me. As many hip-hop listeners attest, this was the first time they'd ever heard of the Illuminati. The malign presence allegedly behind so much of what was wrong with the world. After Jay-Z picked up the phrase in his 1996 album Reasonable Doubt, the meme predictably blew up. But as Prodigy told me, the first place he saw the word Illuminati was in Behold a Pale Horse. And talking about a modern day MC who's following this same logic, he was a patriot, Kissel said of William Cooper. I like that because I'm a patriot too. I'm a proud American. This country was supposed to have been built on to question authority, to hold people in power accountable, not to bite your tongue. I don't know Kissel, this dude, who goes by the rap name William Cooper, by the way. So, to me, that was just one example of this point, that behind so much of what is presented as black radicalism is very white conservative logic that fits well with Alex Jones, which is why some years ago we would have seen KRS sitting with Alex Jones and some of us be confused. Now it's a little more clear as to how that would occur and what the overlaps are. And you know what? At least for now, I'll wrap with this part, just for the sake of time, by just, yeah. And if time permits, we could come back to a couple of other things. But essentially, that was the core of what I found fascinating in this podcast, was the material basis of conspiracies, and then the transmission of some of that logic into Black communities without it being recognized as either originating fully in white supremacist logic and reasoning or having a dangerous parallel to that thought. All right. I don't think I had anything. I think I'll come back to that one. All right. So a quick shift and we'll come right back and keep it going.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, I'm going to come back to that thread in a moment, but I want to. A story was sent to me that is I could probably force the parallel, but there's no need to do that. This story was sent to me recently, and I did want to at least talk a little bit about it because it's the gutting of liberal arts at public comprehensive universities like SUNY Potsdam. The humanities are being hollowed out. So whether it was on EYL the other day or elsewhere where there's been discussion around HBCUs, around ivory tower scholars, one of the points I keep coming back to is the assault on liberal arts as part historically an assault on Black radical consciousness. So, one of the parallels that I could draw thematically this morning could be the nominally Black radical fantasy of STEM related fields leading to some revolutionary adjustment in relationships is itself born out of a white supremacist capitalist conservative logic to suppress liberal arts and tendencies toward critical thinking and radical ideology. This story, broadly speaking, is pointing again to that problem, but making a couple of very interesting points. One, challenging the claim that STEM-related fields offer more employment potential for anyone, which is questionable. And then the other, that those of us in academia are automatically in some freer or more powerful place relative to other sectors of the economy and relative to the institution of higher education. And I think this article further challenges some of that. So I just wanted to look at a little bit. So David Curry writes here, the State University of New York at New York at Potsdam, where I teach, recently fired 7 tenured faculty members, at least one of whom had worked there for more than 35 years. The precise number of contract non-renewals on top of this is a closely guarded secret. 18 programs have been discontinued, and more have been so depleted as to not have any full-time faculty members at all. This, it was recently announced, is just the first round of cuts. In May 2023, our faculty senate resoundingly passed a motion to censure, objecting to the opaque process guiding the cuts. I highlighted faculty senate there because we at Morgan could only aspire through fantasy to have that level of governance and involvement. We are reduced to a university council, which has even less input or certainly oversight. In September, the Faculty Senate passed another resolution calling for a pause in the implementation of the financial plan until financial justifications for that plan were shared with the faculty, Both resolutions were ignored. The supporting data never came. So in other words, the university claims it's going broke, fires a bunch of people, including those with tenure, and no one and no explanation need be really outlined or fully explained or given. This is a tale that is already old from the retelling. The steep cuts at West Virginia University brought the story into national focus, but similar realignments, transformations, and restructurings have been unfolding for the last 3 years. At Emporia State University in Kansas, 30 faculty members were laid off in September 2022 because of extreme financial pressure. SUNY Fredonia and the University of North Carolina at Greensboro have recently announced planned program and personnel cuts that follow the template to a T. Marquette, Valparaiso, Wright State, the list is constantly growing. The template is worth considering even if it hasn't yet reached your campus. In May 2021, the American Association of University Professors published a prescient report, COVID-19 and Academic Governance, noting the post-pandemic trend to realign institutions suffering from enrollment problems. Trustees and presidents of many institutions suddenly began operating in a state of panic after years of fiscal mismanagement, seized upon the pandemic to assert the need to right size, be nimble, realign, innovate, be decisive, and take bold action by unilaterally altering their institution's governance structure, curriculum, and labor force, thus creating an acute crisis in academic governance. The baneful results have included the loss of faculty members' careers and livelihoods, the cheapening of students' educations, and the transformation of institutions' identities. The results were no accident. As an interim dean at the University of Colorado at Boulder put it, never waste a good pandemic. And if this sounds eerily reminiscent of what was said shortly after Katrina, remember one of the politicians down there wanting to get rid of the poor Black community said something to that effect, that Mother Nature had done what public policy had not been able to do for years. So never wasted a good pandemic. In 2020, Kenneth McClure, the last president of the now defunct Medill University, suspended and then rewrote the faculty handbook, laid off several professors, cut programs, and rescinded tenure. I believe that this is an opportunity to do more than just tinker around the edges. We need to be bold and decisive, he wrote to the faculty, a new model in the future of higher education. In a 2023 speech amid the academic transformation that would lead to the elimination of dozens of programs at West Virginia University, President E. Gordon G. offered a similar sentiment. Imagine a garden that is filled with flowers but is never pruned. We have been overgrown for a very long time. So, by the way, I've forgotten, this is not the same article. There was another article I just read, I think also in the Chronicle of Higher Education, that was talking about and had the numbers to the data to back it. But the conclusion, simply put, was that struggles with employment rates and pay are about the same, whether you're talking about STEM-related fields or liberal arts. And they said something to the effect that how you are paid has more to do, the differences in STEM versus liberal arts pay and employment rates is about the same as it would be moving from one part of the country to another in terms of the value of the money in your account. So it's not unnoticeable, but it's not as significant as people. So this idea that when people say, what are you going to do with that philosophy degree? You could ask equally of what are you going to do with that engineering degree or that business degree? This promise of wealth at the end of STEM or as opposed to liberal arts is equally fanciful, because at the end of the day, we still live in a capitalist society. So the idea that we could just move into STEM and that would somehow allow us to circumvent the ravages of a colony is missing the point. But I did want to at least raise this point about the state of academia, and then just quickly that if people are in overworked that is, faculty have too many classes, too many students, are underpaid, have less resources, less health care. It impacts the quality of the education in the classroom. So even civilizationally, it is illogical to set up higher education in this country the way it's currently constituted. And it also is absurd to think whether we are tenured full professor faculty or adjuncts, or whether we are not in academia at all, that if somehow you are in these fields or areas of the economy, that you are somehow automatically safer and more powerful than anybody else. They're literally erasing what the idea of tenure is supposed to mean, and subverting anything that would have anything to do with workers' rights and protection. And we are, at least in Maryland, an ununionized workforce. So, all right, another quick shift, and we'll come back, get to sort of that back on that traditional parallel here in just a second.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, so I mentioned on the morning show Erica Brown's work on financial literacy, and how she, in her work, as it will eventually start to come out, she has identified, for the most part, the sole source for the mythology. As I have claimed I've done when it comes to buying power mythology. And I just wanted to, my Google alert alerted me to a couple of updates just quickly. Listen, Latinos, it's starting to become more and more prevalent in targeting Latinos, not quite in the same way as Black people are targeted, but it's getting there. And of course, it always starts with HMC to advertising and marketing executives stop Latino coding. In today's competitive marketplace, CMOs face immense pressure to achieve growth. Proper investment in authentic engagement with U.S. Latinos who are influencing mainstream culture and fueling demographic shifts is the clear answer. The Hispanic Market Council unveiled a new campaign at its 2024 annual summit, calling on the advertising and marketing industries to stop Latino coding. The resounding message: give Hispanic marketing the weight it deserves. Connect authentically to or kiss your careers goodbye. So, in other words, stop fake representing with a Latino coat and actually come with the money and invest in Latino owned or targeting media. I don't know the Latino media market nearly as well, so I don't know to what extent Latinos actually own Latino targeting media, and to what extent or to what extent white owned Latino targeting media is at play here. But the goal is ultimately all the same: to capture what they're saying is $3.2 trillion in spending power, or what they're calling a GDP. Again, so they're doing the same thing that is done with Black people. They're conflating spending power and a market with GDP and saying that this is how you should measure. Remember, gross domestic product does not measure inequality within a community. It's really only a measurement of the value accruing to those who own the means of production, the businesses and the goods and services and the wealth that is produced by all of that. So instead of, and again, the goal here is for them to stop the cultural appropriation by basically paying us. But here we are again, to my point. Here's McKinsey and Company coming right back into it. They're producing the same buying power nonsense. and it's the source for this argument around Latino spending power. All right, Dhoruba's getting here early, so I'm gonna wrap up here in a quick second. But let me just finish this one point as he gets himself situated, and then I'll come back to any of this later. I don't want to belabor the point if D's gonna show up early, we're gonna get to him early. But I had to go through this because this is what really fully connects all the dots. This news story by Kenny Lloyd. No way that's the same Kenny I used to go to school with. That can't be. No. 1.8 trillion reasons to care about black consumers. No, that's not the same. No, the Kenny Lloyd. Oh yeah, no. That's not Kenny. That's not the same. Okay. Advertising at its core serves a microcosm of societal's views and emotions, and for years, brands have purposely ignored black consumers. Again, same approach. Remember, again, it's all starting with marketing and advertising, and it's all starting with this idea we're going to capture black consumers. And here again, continuing to cling to that era will make their distinction inevitable. The black community is poised to reach 1.8 trillion in buying power this year, up from 1.4 in 2020. Black America remains a cornerstone of this country and its economy. So you click on this to see where that claim is coming from, and you get, whoops, I went back to the wrong one. And you click on that and you get to this article from May of 2023 in Blavity, the power of the black community, how brands could tap into 1.4 trillion in buying power. Then you scroll down to see where they get their number. According to 2020 via report via CNBC, black buying power was 1.4 trillion. You click on that. And it takes you to a CNBC article from July of 2020. As black buying power grows, racial profiling by retailers remains persistent. Then if you scroll on that, read through all the black people this, black people will survive, will do better if we do this, if we do that, blah, 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 support black owned business, Black buying power was 1.4 trillion in 2019, according to the Selig Center for Economic Growth. Can I give myself a quick
message?
So click. It all goes back in the one case, in the terms of Latinos, the more recent version, to McKinsey, who, as I've argued, is slowly taking over. The other one, targeting black folks, click, back to the Selig Center. No one vets the Selig Center's original claims. No one vets how they reach their numbers or what their purpose is or any of that. And then we end up with the mythology. The same point in terms of this thread, you end up with very white, conservative, capitalist, colonialist logic that is Selig Center's interest in helping businesses target their ad revenue and capture more of their market. You have that turn into black radical analysis when mouthed and voiced through black outlets targeting black people as a solution to black economic inequality. And I'll come back to it. Although Dhoruba, put, when you're ready, just turn your camera back on, and I'll bring you on. But so that was going to lead me to, well, I guess, to this episode of Brokish. And again, I'm going to let you all watch it to see how Amber does. I went through this a little bit on the morning show, but what Erica is doing in her work, I can't big it up enough. she's taking the bigger, more powerful wing of this black capitalist mythology that is financial literacy and its mythology, and tracing it to its origins. And it has a very similar, in terms of its projection, a very similar sort of process as does buying power. Not the same source, but a similar white conservative capitalist illogic that is produced and promoted as black radicalism in certain spaces as black capitalism or black buying power. And in this case, what she just shows in this episode, most recently with a Brokish, through that she shows the quiz that is used by that singular source to promote globally the idea that people are poor because they are not financially literate. And if you're not able to answer questions about interest rates and savings and bonds versus interest rates and loan interests and mutual funds, and if you can't do quick math computations and all of these things, then you are deemed financially illiterate and ultimately as undeserving of any justice, equality, or redistribution. So at some point, maybe we'll come back and she said in that episode that, as Erica said, that she didn't want to go get into to what she describes as her nemesis, the name of the academic whose work she is showing to be the Selig Center of financial literacy, if I can sort of say it that way, the McKinsey of financial literacy. But it is remarkable the extent to which this single person is able to have this and I remember when Erica first showed it to me, I kept saying, and I think I got even frustrated because I kept saying there has to be more. This can't be a method by which someone is assessing how poverty exists, because it's so obvious. And as Erica points out in that episode and in her work, the claims of financial literacy ignore all the macroeconomic realities that create the lived experiences of people in the world. So everything is just ignored outside of this fantasy, this mythology, this nonsense of people need just to be more financially literate. I will say that she points out, I mentioned it in the morning show, and again, Dhoruba, whenever you're ready, just open the camera, we can get started. But Obama initiated in 2013 the President's Advisory Council on Financial Literacy, the PACFL. And on that council, among others, was John Hope Bryant. And you can, and if folks remember, and maybe I'll find some links and put them in the chat, you see that John Hope Franklin is a routine contributor to Roland Martin and other Black outlets, Earn Your Leisure, and there he is sitting right next to Obama as they discuss the President's Advisory Council on Financial Literacy. Was it 2011? Maybe I'm off. Yeah. So 2011 is when he did that and created this. And his point, as Erica points out in her show, the point that Obama is making is that the financial system in 2008 collapsed largely because of Americans' lack of financial literacy. Americans' ability to build a secure future for themselves and their families requires navigation of an increasingly complex financial system. As we recover from the worst economic crisis in generations, It is more important than ever to be knowledgeable about the consequences of our financial decisions. We recommit to improving financial literacy and ensuring all Americans have access to trustworthy financial services and products. So you end by talking about trustworthy financial services and products, but you're promoting financial literacy, and Erica goes more into this through the idea that individuals, including poor people, are at the source of their own poverty by making bad decisions. And if we were more financially literate, and with the backing of this work Erica is showing, the argument is more easily made. It's more easily justified, and then it gets filtered through Black outlets, Black analysis, and ends up, certainly in my classroom, I'm sure many of us in activist organizational spaces in our lives who come to this platform recognize it in spaces around us, and maybe are not always aware of the pathway through which that it takes to get there. And again, it is projected as some sort of solution, in this case, for Black inequality. I don't mean to be condescending, but I am proud of her. Her work. I'm honored to get to be part of the crew that she's assembled to usher her through. So yeah, I'm not, I don't at all mean to suggest any paternity, so to speak, over her work. But I'm honored to be associated with it, and I can't wait. I just can't wait for the full launch of it all. All right, I think Dhoruba's about ready here. So, all right, quick break. We'll come right back with Dhoruba Bin-Wahad. Don't go anywhere.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I
Where
like.
we get this echo from?
Oh, here you go, Dhoruba. I think you get the echo. That should take care of the echo. And welcome back, everybody. Oh, he just left. All right, I thought we were there. Dhoruba, come on back. You had logged in. Okay. Anyway, Dhoruba, I think you logged in twice. So while he's getting himself reset, were there any comments, questions, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny? Maybe I can, let me see. Okay, good. Oh, okay, okay. Shout out to Dylan Rodriguez. I didn't mess up. So we're gonna get Dylan rescheduled. So Dylan had been originally scheduled, and then we had to sort of step back because there was an issue with the article he recently published around Stop Asian Hate. That has since come back out, so we're going to reset and talk about that whole thing. And hopefully Dhoruba gets himself back here. Let's see. Send to the Gmail. Let's see. Let me try to do that. But I thought might be some issue with the web connection. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Erica Brown, co-host of the Brokish podcast, and the link to the episode I'm talking about is in the show description. But again, okay, let's try that one more time, and then we'll be right back.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we're right here, Dhoruba. Here we go. Welcome back, everybody. Dhoruba Bin-Wahad joins us. Can you hear me? Now you're muted. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right. Well, welcome back. It's good to see you again. By the way, What you're wearing is getting people around here in trouble. There was another article I didn't get to this morning about professors getting their jobs snatched for being pro-Palestinian. We got BPM co-hosts getting harassed for wearing their I always mispronounce the word, for wearing their keffiyeh. And yeah, so, but you stay causing problems. But good to see you, my man. The real good trouble. You the
Good to
real
see you too.
you the
Good
real
to
good
see.
trouble.
Man, stop sounding like that Negro, man. Stop sounding like that Negro, that bald head dude, man. You getting it? Come on, bro. Good trouble. All trouble is bad. That's why they call it trouble.
There you go.
You know?
So I mentioned this morning you had sent me a couple things wanting the focus to return back to Iran's response and the potential response to that response from Israel. I did watch a couple clips from Scott Ritter, who you had mentioned, and was trying to get caught up. But if I could, just to draw the parallel to what I'm doing here, what I started with this morning, that behind, we're often encouraged to see something presented as a black radical analysis or solution that has its origins truly in white supremacist colonialist logic. And we are encouraged to confusion by who the delivery of the how the message is delivered. And there's a lot right now. We were making fun of Van Jones. He's an easy target, but there's a lot of folks right now attempting to get black and other people back in line, so to speak, with defending Israel and using Iran's, however you want to describe it, attack, logical response, self-defense, as cause to further condemn Hamas, Palestine, and anyone who would challenge or be critical of Israel. So as maybe a place to get started, I'm wondering what you think of that and what you think the actual or a better way we should be interpreting Iran's recent action.
Okay, I gotta find out where I went. I disappeared.
Oh, you're right here. We see and hear you. You on our end, you're right where you haven't gone anywhere.
Okay, I think. Well, first of all, thanks for having me come back and we talk about this timely issue. I think that most of the subscribers and listeners to Black Power Media and to Mix What I Like and to your programs and the programs of the comrades in alternative media, I think most folks are aware that we're in a historical moment and we're on the brink of a major conflict and war in Western Asia that might spread, that does in fact have ramifications in not only sub-Saharan Africa, but will have ramifications right here in the United States, right there in the U.S. Okay, so you mentioned the recent response of Iran to the bombing of its consulate and its embassy in Damascus, Syria. I think that was meant to take, on the part of the Zionists, on the part of the white supremacist settled state of Israel, that was an attempt to pull the United States into a broader, into a more open conflict with Iran and hopefully draw away some of the attention and some of the pressure that's on Israel globally to desist and on its genocide in its genocidal attempt for the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. I think everybody really realizes that's pretty above board. But I think a lot of folks don't really understand the history of or the background for why Iran is this evil, portrayed in the West as this evil, problematical state that's causing trouble for the United States, NATO, and Western Europe. I think that, but we need to understand the origins of that, so we could better understand why Iran's response in the last few days has changed the entire paradigm of the geopolitics in the region, in much the same way, in a different way than Hamas military action assault on October 7th on on the Israel frontier with Gaza. So if I might, is it okay if I try to relate a small history, a small overview of why Iran is in the present position that it's in? Is that cool?
Of course, of course.
I want to do that so we could better understand the ramifications of all of this for Black folks in the United States and in the diaspora. That's why we want to do that, especially for Muslims and the Muslim Ummah here there in the United States and in Africa. Well, first of all, let's begin with the Islamic Revolution, the overthrow of the American stooge Shah Pahlavi of Iran in 1979. And when this happened, the geopolitics, when the Iranian Revolution in 1979 jumped off, the geopolitics of Western Asia drastically changed. And it presented the United States with an unprecedented challenge to its post-war military regional hegemony. From that moment on, Iran would become and did become the pariah of American and Western interests in what we call the Middle East and that I refer to as Western Asia. This hegemony was threatened, and in fact, it was shattered by the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And why was this? I think it's very important for many of us to understand that before 1979, the bulwark, the major keystone of American military and economic power in Western Asia or the Middle East was the European settler state, Zionist state of Israel and Iran. They were the major beneficiaries of U.S. military aid, the major beneficiaries of U.S. military, of foreign aid and investment. Iran at that time, I believe, was the third or fourth largest producer of oil in the region. And so the United States was heavily invested in maintaining Iran as a client state under the authoritarian dictatorship of Shah Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. And now the Arab regimes in the region, of course, are predominantly Sunni Muslim, and were aligned with American hegemony. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the collective Arab regimes of North Africa. They were all part of the U.S. Hegemonic formations of anti-communist fronts against Russian and Soviet influence in the oil-rich region of the Middle East. And they were the guardians of the vital trade route of the Eastern Mediterranean, the Suez Canal and the Persian Gulf. All of these reactionary regimes, however, relied on U.S. and NATO military aid and the oil revenues that they derived from Europe and the United States. But the non-Arab, non-Sunni Muslim Islamic Revolution of Iran presented the West and the United States, and NATO in particular, with an unprecedented threat to its regional control and influence. I think that this was because, for the first time, an Islamic-based theocratic movement had seized power from a modern US client state with the fundamental messianic secular agenda that was anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist, and pro-Palestinian. This was unprecedented. I think the Iranian Revolution in 1979 caught the US intelligence community and NATO essentially by surprise, off guard. And the US military and its intelligence establishment scrambled to counter the impact of the Iranian Islamic Revolution on the Muslim streets. You know, on the Muslim streets, the Sunni Muslims, by and large, were ecstatic and happy and proud and sympathized with the rise of a Muslim state that opposed Western domination and humiliation of the Ummah, the Muslim community, at the hands of the West. But Jared, such good cheer, however, was not shared by the Arab elites and the Arab governments, whose veracity relied on the anti-communist based alliance with Western Europe and the US, not to mention their personal wealth and power that they derived from being the flunkies of the United States. This was especially true for the ruling monarchies of the oil-rich region, specifically Saudi Arabia, as well as essentially anti-religious Arab socialist Ba'athist regimes in Iraq and Syria, Egypt, and in North Africa. So the United States and its allies were, and the ruling elites of this region were terrified. They were very afraid that the Iranian Revolution might spread and and might take hold in their excuse me, in their own backyard. So to counter the regional geopolitical reverberations of the Iranian anti-imperialist messianism, the US stoked the historical religious sentiments between Sunni and Shiite Islam. There's a long history of division. There's origins of the history of the divisions in the Muslim Ummah that stretches back hundreds of years to the divide of Islam after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the United States, this historical division and rift, the United States sought to intensify and use for its own benefit, as well as the racial differences between the predominantly Arab Sunni regimes and populations in the Middle East and the non-Arab Iranians. Some of our brothers and sisters may not know that the Iranians are not Arab. They're historically Persian, and so it would get this attempt that the United States would try to use in order to divide Muslims and thereby thwart the influence of the Iranian Revolution on the Middle East would give rise ultimately to the export of Saudi Arabian Wahhabism, Wahhabi extremism, and creation of ISIS and ISIL. But that's another story. It's important to note that the rise of ISIL and ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, North Africa, Iraq's war with Iran, and the U.S. subsequent invasion of Iraq to understand why Iran became such an important entity to be contained and, if possible, overthrown. Some of this has had a lot to do with NATO's overthrow of Libya's Muammar Gaddafi in North Africa, and these events are there in Somalia, in on the Horn of Africa, were all byproducts of U.S. geopolitical attempts to rein in or misdirect the rise of the Islamic motivated anti-imperialism that Iran represented. This was very important. And historically, we have to understand even the non-Muslim Pan-African community has to understand why this is really crucial. Because up into that period, up into 1979, the anti-imperialist struggles that swept the global South at the height of the Cold War in Africa, Western Asia, and Eastern Asia during the 50s and 60s and early 70s were all by and large ideologically anti-capitalist and socialist in nature. And they were supported in many instances by the Soviet Union, Russia. The so-called Cold War, we can argue, was a contrived and false dichotomy in many ways, Jared. It was a false dichotomy created in the wake of World War II to secure Western finance capitalism's recompense and reparations process from Germany and from the ravages of World War II. It represented the debts that the former imperialist nations were in at the end of World War II was considerable. And so the United States at this particular period of time during the Cold War advocated and pursued a policy based on the so-called domino theory, that if one nation fell to communist rule, then every other nation in the region would be in jeopardy and would fall, you know. And so the the U.S. pursued this policy vigorously. It intervened in South Korea in 1950 in order to stop the unification of South Korea with North Korea under a communist government. It thwarted the national unification of Southeast Asia under following in the 1960s in order to thwart the unification of Vietnam. The United States stepped in after the French were defeated in 1954 and kicked out of Southeast Asia. They stepped in and took over that war. The United States also participated in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. It supported South Africa's consolidation of apartheid regimes in South Africa. So, you know, these were very important events, and they all were basically social movements, struggles against imperialism by socialists or popular non-secular movements. The liberation struggles in the Congo and Angola and Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau were not religiously based, and so the 1979 Islamic Revolution, therefore, was dramatically changed this tendency, dramatically changed this paradigm of anti-capitalism and anti-imperialism. And so we can say in summation that the Iranian Revolution in 1979 represented a unique historical and geopolitical dilemma for imperialism, especially for the Christian for the Christian West and for the white supremacist constructs, the white supremacist settler states that grew out of British colonialism, Canada, the United States, Australia, and so forth. So the West's response, therefore, to the Iranian Revolution would serve as a signature rationale for defining secular anti-imperialism and anti-Islamic terrorism, the fight against so-called Muslim extremism. But that is when we began to hear about Muslim extremists, about hatred for the West by Muslims, about Islamic terrorism. All of these propaganda strategies were put forth by the United States and the West and NATO in order to divide not only the Muslim Ummah, but separate the left the progressive lefts in most of the metropoles of the West and in the United States from the Islamic movements that were arising in the Middle East and in Asia, from the Islamic, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and elsewhere. So it's very important to understand this history and its significance, and so to compensate for the overthrow of the Shah of Iran in Tehran, the CIA engineered had. Well, let me backtrack. The Shah of Iran came to power as the result of a CIA engineered coup of a democratically elected president in Iran, Mossadegh, in 1954. And so there was always this deep-seated resentment among the Iranian people towards the U.S. And so it was very difficult for the United States to control that deep-seated resentment without an authoritarian flunky and regime in place in Iran. And so we have to understand that what we're looking at right now, the Iranian response to the Zionist attack on its consulate in Syria, the crucial role that the Zionist regime in Tel Aviv played in America's attempt to maintain its racist and reactionary influence in Western Asia, is important. In fact, right now, it has brought us to the brink of war, to the brink of regional and perhaps global war. So Iran was always in the U.S. and West sights for destabilization, and it's been subject to sanctions, demonization, interference in its internal affairs, but it has always responded and never directly. It's never directly responded to the West when its internal affairs were interfered with. And for 40 years, Israel had a carte blanche, basically, to carry out overt and covert attacks on Iran. And often the CIA financed its proxies to do this. There was the assassination of Iranian scientists all through the late, the early 20s, in 2019, it unleashed the United States CIA and Israel unleashed the Stuxnet virus that crippled Iran's computer network, its atomic program, and that managed this nuclear program, the network that did that. The United States supported terrorist groups within Iran, such as the Mujahideen, Khalaq, to attack Iran's infrastructure. And now recently, the bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus and Syria earlier this month that killed several Iranian officials marked the beginning of the end of Iran's complacency in the face of U.S. aggression and U.S. attacks. So we are now awaiting the Israeli response to Iran's self-defense of its territory, because the consulate in Syria and all consulates and embassies are considered the national territory of the host of the nation that has them. So that's where we're at right now. And I think it's very important for folks to understand that the response that Israel, that the Zionists will probably come across with, will lead to an escalation in the conflict in that region, and if not all-out war.
No, thank you for all of that. That was incredibly helpful. You know, in one of the messages you sent me, you were encouraging that I check and, you know, or incorporate at least some of the work or analysis of the situation of Scott Ritter. And I did look up a couple of videos and found what he had to say very interesting. But I did want to ask a kind of quick detour question related to that, because when I mentioned him in the morning on the morning show today, there were a couple people in the chat that were raising criticisms of Ritter based on accusations of in his personal life or his, you know, some of it his politics. And it did occur to me that, you know, I've also, you know, a couple times you've sent me something and I've, you know, whined and bristled back at you about the source and why are you sending me this such and such, and why you want me to watch so and so, I don't need such and such for such and such. And you were always quick to bring it back to the politics involved. And so I'm wondering if you would want to say a word or two about how we should address ourselves to various sources, given what our personal biases might be, the politics of the source might be, allegations in their private life might be. You know, if you don't mind, if you would, I'd be interested in having you share with us a little bit of your thoughts on that before we get to some of what Ritter actually was saying and what you think of what he's saying.
Well, I have a fundamental understanding of who Scott Ritter is, where he comes from, and how he rose to prominence during the Iraq War. Scott Ritter was atomic, a nuclear, an atomic weapons inspector in the run-up to the Iraqi U.S. invasion in Iraq. And at that time, the UN weapons inspectors could not find any weapons of mass destruction that the Bush administration had claimed that Saddam Hussein had, and was on the verge of turning into a nuclear weapon. Scott Ritter was an ex-Marine. He was wholeheartedly gung-ho, jingoistic American, and there's no doubt about that. But you see, Jared, one of the things that I've learned is that is that in understanding the geopolitics of the world today, we have to understand, as it's been pointed out, by revolutionaries and revolutionary movements that the subjective factor is the determinant factor in war and in politics. That without the subjective factor, we cannot understand how enemies and friends will behave under certain types of conditions and given certain types of, of, um, of material circumstances. Whatever I might think of Scott Ritter's background as an American soldier, I I do understand his analysis, and I do understand and evaluate the points that he's making based on the information that I have and the understanding that I have of the basic understanding, limited as it may be, of the geopolitics uh, of, of the area in concern. Now, one of the things that we don't like to admit is that many of us are not experts in in the use of intelligence, material intelligence gathering, and in this age of instant communications and the weaponization of data, it's especially important to stick to the facts, to stick to or try to deal with the realities, and rather than our particular dogma or pensions to hate on this or hate on that. You know, I really don't. I don't. I was about to become profane. I really don't care about whether Scott Ritter has a background as a neocon or imperialist or a foot soldier in the United States Marines. What I do care about and what I do try to understand is his analysis of my enemy and how our enemies organize and deal with situations. And one of the enlightening parts about a person like Scott Ritter is that he once was our enemy. He was trained by them. He understands their mentality. He understands how ignorant they can be, and he understands where they're coming from when they come up with certain types of esoteric or seemingly inane conclusions. So that's very valuable for us. And anybody that read Sun Tzu and the Art of War may recall, and I'm paraphrasing, the warning or the advice of Sun Tzu that said, "Know your enemy and know their thinking, and you can fight or you can wage 1,000 battles and never fear defeat." So knowing our enemy, the best way to know our enemy, of course, is by those who have turned against them in their interests and who now see them in the light that we would want them to have seen when they were functioning on the other side of the barricade. So I'm not really swayed by folks' antipathy or hatred towards the source of the energy of the information that I directed you to. And I might point out too that we could say the same thing about some of the folks on the outside of the barricades. Those who have talked about the messianic movement of the Nation of Islam and how it has its positive and its negatives. Many of these same individuals who are unwilling to look at certain facts and because of their historical affinity to say Al Sharpton or a Louis Farrakhan need to be checked as well. So I don't pay that shit no mind. I'm dealing with it is what it is, and I try to always draw a clear line of distinction between myself and my people's enemies, and I try to understand the strategies and the thinking that goes into um, the strategies and tactics of our enemy.
Right on. Appreciate that. So one of the things, among the things I heard Scott Ritter talking about related to what's going on right now is that
Oh, and let me say this: if you think that that's if they think that Scott Ritter, because of his background or because of certain associations he might have had in the past, that his information is unworthy of serious consideration and evaluation. Think about this: the electronic intifada, which is covered extensively the war in Gaza, the Palestinian struggle, which no one questions the validity and the veracity of the electronic intifada. They themselves have quoted Scott Ritter's analysis in presenting their program. So you can go to the electronic intifada and evaluate whether the information that they are uh, um, um, putting out and exposing um, to the people has more veracity or less or more veracity than they would attribute to, say, a Amy Goodman in Democracy Now. I watched Amy Goodman in Democracy Now with some of the people that they had on there, some liberals and latte leftists that they have on, and their analysis and their views are definitely bordering, if not on superficial, in many respects, downright reactionary. So, I mean, it is what it is when we look at the weaponization of data, when we understand the backgrounds of people some who have came from our side of the barricades, who are now arch reactionaries and perpetrating a fraud of progressive politics.
yeah, right on. So some of what Ritter was saying that I thought was interesting was for instance that Netanyahu, through his own desire to protect his personal political legacy, is dragging Israel and anyone that wants to go with them in that region to potential destruction and a direct conflict with Iran, and that Iran is not something to trifle with. That their response was measured and specifically targeted, not to hurt anyone, and just to give a warning. That they're not interested in, despite accusations, developing nuclear technology. They're only attempting to make use of various elements involved in that process for other purposes. That they've set out even a fatwa against mass weapons of mass destruction as being anti-Islam, and a number of things that we don't often get to hear about in terms of U.S. mass media about Iran and why they would have done what they did, and why Israel's challenge to them is a threat possibly to the planet. So, was there more in a Ritter type analysis that you think we need to be hearing from, or in the analysis of others that you think is important to highlight, or
Yeah,
yeah,
I think absolutely. I think he's spot on when he evaluates Iran's response to the embassy attack as measured. I think he was definitely spot on. I think the Iranians have set up a scenario, have set up a number of Arab regimes that, if we actually look into what happened, and I'll briefly run this down. Um, um, if we look at what the Iranians did in response, they launched over 350 drones and guided missiles at Israel, and they gave a number of nations, Arab nations, that's bordering on Israel, um, I think a 72-hour warning of the attack, that they were going to that these drones were not aimed at them, that they were aimed at the Zionist settler state and that they would overfly their airspace. And what did these Arab regimes do? Jordan, Egypt, and where else? Iraq. Many of these regimes forwarded this information, this heads up, to the Israelis in the U.S. And so that was brilliant because it brought out the fact that many of these Arab nations are complicit in the genocide of the Palestinian people as we speak. Although they're making like they support Palestine and that they support the Palestinian struggle and the establishment of a Palestinian state, when in reality they are down with the U.S. and the racist dogs in Tel Aviv, and so Iran was brilliant in giving them a heads up. They didn't have to do that. And they also gave them a heads up because they wanted to be proportionate in their response. Now, the next thing is that of those 350 plus odd drones and missiles, most of these were obsolete or old school drones. Most of them were, many of the drones could be detected far away and could be intercepted. Many of these drones were very inexpensive. They're at $10,000 at most with some of them. But amongst them, scattered amongst them, were a few of Iran's better missiles that were aimed at the air base and the intelligence center that launched the attack on the consulate. And they did hit home. They did hit these areas. But the drones, the majority of these drones were shot out the sky, and they were not shot out the sky by just Israel. Israel air defense would have been overwhelmed if it tried to do this on its own. It had to employ the U.S., the French, Jordan, and other Arab nations themselves shot some of these drones out of the sky to protect Israel. So it was a brilliant move on the part of the Iranians to, one, show that the Arab regimes, although despite their hypocritical posturing in support of Palestine, was solidly behind the United States and Iran. It showed the Arab people that their leaders were full of shit. That's one thing. The other thing, it also tested the defensive mechanisms of Israel and without expending its best top of the line equipment. So this is one of the reasons why the Iranians came out and said publicly that this was the end of this issue of the attack in their response to the attack on their consulate, that they were through with it. They're finished. And so now the ball is in the Israelis' court. And as we see, John Bolton and the war hawks in Congress have come out talking about this is an opportunity to strike at the Iranian nuclear program and directly attack Iran and all of these things. And Iran has said that the Iranian generals have said that if you could escalate this if you want, but what just happened is not what's going to happen if we respond, if you attack us again, and we have to respond. So I think that Ritter was absolutely spot on when he noted that the response of the Iranians was measured. It was duplicitous in the sense that although it was aimed at Israel, it was also designed to bring out those Arab regimes that are supporting Israel. And if we see how brilliant it was because we have reports on the news as we speak that the war cabinet of Netanyahu is divided by those hardliners who want to attack Iran, and those who feel that they should delay such an attack and consolidate their newfound alliance, their newfound coalition um, that helped deter and meet the Iranian attack. This newfound coalition, the King of Jordan and the Egyptian Al-Sisi, because if we recall, the plan of the Israelis when they invaded Gaza was to exterminate the Palestinian people, destroy the infrastructure of Gaza, and drive the Palestinians to the south and into the Sinai Desert. What foiled this was Egypt's refusal to open up the Rafah crossing and allow the Palestinians to flee into the desert. And so Netanyahu was talking about and threatening to invade Rafah on the ground in order to do away with the last of the Palestinian resistance. And the Americans are terrified of that prospect because of the humanitarian catastrophe that would ensue, and how the U.S. would have blood on its hands in a way that it could not absolve itself of. So the response of the Iranians, in my view, was very strategic and brilliant, and it put the ball in the court of the white supremacists, the European settler state of Israel, and its backers, Germany and the United States and NATO. So yeah, I believe he was spot on with this. But let me say this about Maya Kahani before I go, because I wanted to segue to some of this into how this can impact on Black folks and Africans, the Black folks here in the United States, and Africans in sub-Saharan Africa. Maya Kahani, the racist
terrorist
rabbi, Maya Kahani, the racist terrorist and so-called rabbi and man of God, was the founder of the JDL, the Jewish Defense League in New York, back in the 60s. And the Jewish Defense League in New York was a rabidly racist, pro-police formation that sprung up in Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. And his protege at that time was Netanyahu. Yeah, I guess many folks don't know that. Maya Kahani's protege in the JDL was Netanyahu. And just as Zionist Israel enjoys the unconditional support of the U.S. military, U.S. military-industrial complex, Maya Kahani's JDL in the late 60s and early 70s enjoyed the unconditional support of the New York City Police Department and the New York City legal system. In fact, they had citizens patrols in Williamsburg along the borders, along the border between the Jewish enclaves of Williamsburg and the rest of Brooklyn that was predominantly Black. In a few occasions, the JDL tried to boycott and attack the Black Panther Party offices in Harlem and Brooklyn in 1969. A lot of people don't know that. And these so-called boycotts and pickets and picket lines were rebuffed by Black Panthers wielding baseball bats, and the JDL, these demonstrations were protected and by the police, by the NYPD, who ran interference for the JDL. And also, finally, I just want to mention domestically that in the winter of 1968 and 1969, when the Zionists controlled UFT, the United Federation of Teachers, the union, the teachers union in New York, they led a citywide strike against the public school system, protesting the dismissal of a number of racist Jewish teachers in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, the black school district of Ocean Hill, Brownsville in Brooklyn. And the JDL came out in force to intimidate the Ocean Hill, Brownsville Black School Board and demanded the reinstatement of these teachers. And so it was this struggle, this general strike of the UST that forced the reformation and the change of the public school system in New York that we see today. So the struggle of Zionism, the impact of Zionist um, 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 projects and Zionist influence formations in the United States has been considerable when it comes to opposing self-determination in the Black communities and opposing Black and Brown human rights. So we need to understand that this persists today. We have the Hakeem Jeffries who are on AIPAC's payroll. We have the Congressman Meeks and who are on their payroll, and Van Jones and all of these Negroes and who are in the Congressional Black Caucus derive a considerable amount of support and money from Zionist organizations like AIPAC and and the other philanthropic Jewish political action committees. So we have Black leaders who have moral allegiance to the Zionist project of Israel than they do to the livelihood of Black people and to the benefit of the Black community, to the struggles of the Black community. So what's happening in the Middle East is not unrelated to what's going on in these state capitals that where the Republican Party and the Democratic Party who are under Zionist influence have passed bills and legislation restricting Black voters, restricting the ability of Black people to mobilize and organize themselves in their own behalf. And we also see that the rise of the cop cities as training centers for the militarized police forces of America have spread across the United States. There's dozens of cop cities that are rising up across the United States to train law enforcement into the tactics and the techniques of the IDF employ in Gaza and in the West Bank. And so there's this long history of collusion between Israeli self-defense forces and U.S. Militarized police and the U.S. military. So we need to understand that what's happening in Gaza right now, this genocide that's happening right in front of our faces, will soon come home to the United States, where the rise of fascism and white supremacy and the Christian right is focusing all of its energies now on people of color, on migrants coming across the southern border. We need to understand what this really means, how it's impacting on our communities. Why is the immigration's problem such a burning issue today? And how we have Black leaders and we have Black activists and Black entertainment figures who have focused on migrants as if they're a placebo for Black people, as if they're going to usurp our political power in the United States, and somehow these migrants and immigrants coming thousands of miles from from Latin America are somehow a threat to Black people and Black people's rights to vote and progress in the United States. This is absurd. If any Black person sat down and studied history and understood what the Monroe Doctrine created in the Western Hemisphere, from Haiti to Guatemala, we would understand that the people that are fleeing to the southern border of the United States are fleeing a situation that the United States military and corporations created in their country that made their country unlivable, that made their country impossible to stay in. And so they're looking for a better life, and they're coming to the seat of the empire, the United States, and so we need to understand what this means, what this so-called um, um, dilemma of migrants coming into the United States means. And it's not just here in the United States that the immigration and migrant problem is fueling the rise of right-wing racism and white supremacy and fascism. It's also happening throughout Europe, in Italy, in France, across the Mediterranean, in Europe, in Spain, and elsewhere. The rise of fascism is tied directly to migrants coming from the global South, coming across the Sahara, coming from the African, from sub-Saharan Africa, looking for a better life because the United States has hollowed out their nations and hollowed out the economics of their country. So we need to get a grip on the geopolitics of American empire and how it is in the throes of contraction and collapse as we speak, and not rush stupidly into assuming that somehow the Christian evangelicals on the left, on the right, I'm sorry, and the neoliberals on the left are somehow unrelated to each other. That we should be flocking to Trump, to the orange man, to this flat ass cracker, to gain some type of headway in the American economic and political sphere. We should revisit Malcolm's a message to the grassroots and what he had to say about both the wolves of the racist right and the foxes of the neoliberal and left. That they are both enemies of people of color, of poor people, and of working people. And we should not mistake one as our friend, simply because they are more overt and more outspoken in their racism and their hatred of Black people. Make America great again is not a code word for Black folks are going to finally have a seat at the table and become equal opportunity oppressors.
On Dhoruba, I don't know what your time is like. Your camera, if you got a few minutes, if you could tilt your camera down so we're kind of losing sight of you a little bit there. Appreciate it.
Is that better?
Much better, much better.
Yeah, I haven't seen myself all this time I was talking. So
okay.
I don't know what I did to miss out. I moved something around, and I haven't seen myself. Okay, there I go. But I'm using the camera on FaceTime. Is this better?
You've looked. This is how you look for most of the interview. Just for whatever reason, a few minutes ago, the camera dropped down a little bit, but so you're fine. It's been fine.
I look like this. This is better.
Yeah, this is much better than what it was just a minute ago. But this is how you've looked throughout the whole discussion. So,
Oh, I look like I had my head in my lap, huh?
Just a little bit for a few minutes there, but I didn't want to cut you off because we could hear you loud and clear, and that's ultimately, I guess, most important for right now. But just a couple things. CS, thanks for the super sticker, and please, folks, continue to contribute directly to Dhoruba via the Cash App you see below. I mean, the GoFundMe below, and the link to which is also in the show description. Chitty Matcha, yes, I will. I'll share the generator that your doctor put me onto. TMB, thanks for the super chat. What was President Carter or Reagan's role in the propaganda against Iran? Prayers for Dhoruba. Thank you very much, TMB. You got a couple minutes to talk about that question, Dhoruba?
Well, if we remember, Carter, the peanut farmer, was the interim president after the fall of Richard Nixon and the rise of Ronald Reagan, if I'm not mistaken. If my
I
memory
think
serves
no,
me
no, no. I think
right.
it went Nixon, then Ford, and then Ford left.
Well, Ford came
right.
but Ford was appointed, was left in office by Nixon.
Right.
Remember, he was vice president, and
Right.
Nixon resigned, so Ford
Right.
became the president. So he was in Ford's term. I mean, Nixon's term, and right after that came
Carter came
Carter.
after Ford. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Reagan.
And then Reagan. Yep.
And
Yep.
yeah, and if you remember the hostage situation in Iran when the Islamic Revolution seized the U.S. embassy in Iran, remember? When they took hostages, and that
Yep.
drawn out hostage situation, Carter tried to resolve, and I remember reading somewhere about that and how Reagan managed to capitalize on that hostage situation in such a way that the Iranians, I believe Carter tried a military operation to free the hostages, and it failed. And a whole lot of Marines or special forces were killed in this operation. It went awry, and this was under Ford. And as Ford was exiting his office, Reagan capitalized on his so-called weakness or whatever, and it was Reagan that negotiated the release of the hostages, and that was put in his. That was a feather that was put in his cap.
So
And
just to help us both a little bit, just for and everyone involved, just a couple things here. The Iran hostage crisis was from 79 November to January 81, 444 days. So it went from Carter's presidency into Reagan's.
to Reagan,
And there was,
yeah.
let's see, this is where we get that Argo film where Ben Affleck plays a Latino to take credit for the hostage escape, right? Under the coverage of a film, the pretense of a film. And then I thought Kissinger, I was trying to look it up because I thought Kissinger played some kind of funky role in blocking Carter from freeing the hostages so Reagan could do it and be given credit for it and therefore win the 1980 election.
That's right.
But I don't remember the details. I feel like something funky like that happened. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could go back over it, and I'm quite sure some of it will come to back to my memory. But if I'm not mistaken, the Iran Contra um, uh, um, um, scandal arose as a result of Reagan's negotiations with with Iran, and the segue between those negotiations, or the relationship between Reagan's negotiations with Iran and his opposing the and his support of the Contras in Nicaragua, arming the Contras in Nicaragua. There was a lot of back and forth at the early stages of the Iranian Revolution, in which Iran, if we have to understand that when the Shah was overthrown, there was a lot of U.S. military equipment and fighter jets and all of this stuff that was left in Iran, and so the Iranian state at that time was new. It was relatively weak in terms that it hadn't consolidated its power fully. And the Revolutionary Guards, who had seized the hostages at the American embassy, you know, they wanted to parlay, or they tried to parlay the holding of the hostages to avoid U.S. military uh, um, wholesale intervention in the Islamic Revolution as it consolidated its power. And the U.S. decided after that to use Iraq and Saddam Hussein as the cudgel to try to squash and shatter the Islamic Revolution, and that resulted in the Iranian-Iraqi War. And I believe that war went on for 3 years or so. It was the most brutal modern war of that, of the 20th century. A lot of people don't understand that, but Iran survived that war and came out of that war stronger than it went in, whereas Saddam Hussein came out of that conflict demonstratively weakened. So I think that all of these events occurred in the subcontext of the general um, um, points that I was trying to make of how the United States attempted to destabilize, to neutralize, and to overthrow the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution, um, um, when it came to power in 1979. And so a lot of these intrigues um, were carried out by the U.S. intelligence services. And the U.S. intelligence services, of course, are part of the deep state. And it didn't really matter what president was in office. The U.S. intelligence apparatus, always had its own agenda and always maintained a certain continuity of, of action and reaction um, during the transition between the head of the regime, the presidency. I think we know that clear. I think we realize that clearly um, in during the height of the Cold War, when during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Kennedy brothers and the assassinations that occurred then, the CIA's involvement in Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II. That before the CIA became the CIA, when it was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA. They brought all the Nazi scientists and Nazi intelligence officers into the United States because they believed that the Nazis under Adolf Hitler and Abwehr, the political repressive police of the Nazis, were anti-communist, and therefore they could fit right in to the Dulles brothers, the head of the CIA, John Foster Dulles, and his brother. Um, um, that they fit right into the U.S. Cold War agenda and strategy. So we need to appreciate that the CIA, it's the FBI, um, and the intelligence agencies of the state of the North American of the United States police state have always had institutional continuity, and um, and they have maintained that institutional continuity um, from the end of World War II until the present.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Dhoruba, look, I mean, anytime you got some more to say, just holler. Come on back. Let us know. I appreciate you keeping me and us in check. And on top of
Yeah,
things.
man. I think that that the that our black independent media really needs to or should um, um, interact more with as a political education tool for the international for internet in terms of international solidarity with other anti-fascists and other anti-racist and anti-imperialist movements in other countries. A lot of people uh, that I've been in touch with have have tuned in to Black Power Media. That's tuned in to your show, Jared, and Kalanji's show, and derived a significant amount of information and insight into what's happening uh, in the United States, what's happening with the African diaspora, and and so forth. And I like to say, although we focused on Western Asia and Palestine and Israel and Iran, I would like to say that right now, as we speak, the greatest humanitarian crisis that's facing humanity is in the Sudan and the war in the Sudan. And the war in the Sudan is is fueled and supported by external forces, by external players. And one of these external players is the UAE, who is financing and arming the former Janjaweed, now the Rapid Deployment Force, that's waging a war against the, the um, the military, state military apparatus in the Sudan. And this has caused over several million people to become internal refugees. It is leading to the outbreak of famine in parts of Africa, in parts of the Sudan. And this war in the Sudan is of monumental and importance to how events will play out um, um, in the Middle East, in Western Asia. The feedback and the blowback from what's happening in Gaza is going to affect the Sahel in Africa. It's going to affect um, the struggles in the Sudan and in Central Africa and the war in the Eastern Congo. Um, um, so we should not sleep on the fact that what's happening in the Gaza, what's happening with Iran in the Middle East, is not just the issue of Arab Sunnis versus Shia Iranians. It's not just an issue of the European settler state of Israel. That's one aspect of it. But that war and the U.S. war in that region is going to have enormous ramifications for the struggles in Africa.
Oh, right on. Thanks for that. And when you come back next time, we can start there. Get an
Absolutely,
update
I
on
would
that.
like to do that.
Yeah, just
Absolutely,
let me
and
know.
that's very that struggle in the Sudan and what's going on at the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, boy, that's more than one. That's more than one show, bro. And we have to get a whole bunch of folks to chime in on this struggle, because that's a very complex struggle.
No, right on. But so listen, Dhoruba, thank you very much again for joining us. Please, everybody, check the link that's in the show description, scrolling beneath us, and show some support as is possible to you. And it's been great. Again, Dhoruba, thank you very much. Come on through anytime. And of course, as always, we know you're willing to fight for it. So peace to you, as Fred Hampton used to say, and we'll catch you next time, starting with the Sudan. ASAP.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Power to the people.
Right on. Power Thanks a lot, Dhoruba. Right on. Thanks again, Dhoruba. All right, everybody. Big, again, shout out to Dhoruba. Thanks to him and to all of you for coming through. Please do check that link in the description and show some support as much as you can, when you can. Again, because freedom fighting does not come with a pension plan. And, obviously, if anyone has earned our continued support, it's Dhoruba. So please do that. Again, thank you all very much. Please like, share, subscribe, join, support the platform, put this in your socials, do all of those things, and come on back ASAP. Make sure you have the bell rung, and catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like and throughout the BPM platform. Peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. Thanks again, everybody.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago, for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.